Welcome to Rich in Relationship. And today I have a very special guest, Carmela Bennett, who is one of the most awesome therapists I know. And let me tell you first what I love about you, Carmela. Are you ready for this?
I'm ready. I'm
But
ready.
first, actually, how are you?
You know what? I'm well. I'm little self-disclosure. I got my first COVID haircut today. And
Woohoo!
so it's like the little things, right? All these little things that we're dealing with, they just feel like events and really special.
Yeah,
So
no, you definitely celebrate the small victories today because that's
yeah,
what we got for the most part.
yeah, yeah.
So here's what I love about Bennett. Carmela Bennett, Carmela Bennett,
Yes.
Carmela Bennett. What I love about Carmela Bennett is she's super educated, right? Like she knows her stuff. She knows her psych theory. She's grounded in that, right? So she's got a great mind, but she also has like this huge heart, which is why I have her on the show. She loves people, and everybody that I know of that she's worked with rages about how awesome she is. And that's why Carmela's on the show. And she's also an expert in mind-body practices. And I'm hoping that we're going to frame these in the context of building intimacy in a relationship, or how not having them might take you the other way. How's that sound?
Sounds good to me. And it sounds right on.
So tell us about mind-body practices, interaction, synergy.
Do you want to know how I got into it? And then that will help you understand, like, is that part of, can I start that way?
That's what I would normally ask. So let's go there. All right.
No, I mean, I think
Let's start over. What drew you into the world of psychotherapy?
I got into the world of psychotherapy in this circuitous but intentionally, subconsciously intentional way. When I was a little kid, I was extremely shy. I was so shy that um, I had a hard time like speaking up, and a really hard time speaking to adults.
Mm.
And so like teachers, I also was brought up in a fairly, what you could say is a fairly rigid household
Mm-hmm.
family, right? And so there was my personality shyness, and then the family structure was there was a lot of tension. There was a fair amount of anger that was that would go on, and so that being shy, it shut me down even more. You know, so I really learned into being quiet and fearful about being seen. And at the same time, when I went to school, I saw this like people would talk to each other, and I could feel how difficult it was for me. And then when I was about 7, my parents took me to a production of the Nutcracker at Christmas time.
Yeah.
And yeah, and I remember it still. It was in Saratoga.
I don't think any kid ever forgets the first time of the Nutcracker, so I totally get that. So it was
Yeah.
in Saratoga.
But what I saw, was this, like, I remember the lighted stage and the music
Mm-hmm.
and the movement, and it was like this life, right? I saw this amazing, what I couldn't describe as life, but it was like all this aliveness. And I wanted that. And then I asked my parents if I could go take dance class.
Mm-hmm.
And so they let me take dance class. And what I discovered was when I was in class, I could actually do different things. I felt differently. I felt bigger. I didn't say it that way back then, right?
Cool.
Yeah, but I could like dance, and I could like be bigger, and I loved it. And then I would kind of leave dance class, and I'd go back and kind of be smaller. But there was something about it that, like, okay, how do you be different? Like, I felt different in
Mm-hmm.
dance class, and I would talk to the other kids in class, and I was really excited, and I loved performing, and so there was something there. And so I took dance. I've always taken dance. I still do. And
Awesome.
yeah. And so then, I just distinctly remember dance and movement like took me in different places emotionally than I could ever be. And so I kept doing it throughout high school and college. And then when I got into, I was so curious about, well, how can people be different, right? How can you change?
Mm-hmm.
The other dynamic, of course, was how can families, because I grew up with a lot of, there was a lot of tension in my, my family. My father was pretty tough. He was a tough guy. He was tough emotionally. And I just remember over and over saying, I want that to be different. Like, there's got to be a different way.
Mm-hmm.
Like, there has to be a different way to be in a family. And when I have a family, I want it to be different than this, and happier and more open, and people talking to each other.
Yeah.
And so anyway, I went to grad school. I was like, okay, let me do psychology, right? That would be the way to do it. And so I got all the theory, and I started to practice. But at the same time, I was always drawn to the creative parts of therapy.
Uh-huh.
We started out working with an art therapist, and she and I started to do movement stuff, and she was doing art stuff with kids, which is really natural, right?
Right.
And so from there, it just kept building, and it was always a body piece for me. Like, okay, the body has got to be included here somehow. Along the way, I trained into more theory and language, and really how to practice that with people. And it's made all the difference, because what I've discovered, as many people have, is that we can talk and talk and talk, right? Like, you can talk forever and nothing necessarily changes. You can develop more awareness, but sometimes the emotional sets, right, the emotional patterns don't shift a lot in a lasting way.
Yeah, no, that makes sense.
Yeah. So anyway.
Actually, for me, I'm thinking about, for me, like as you're talking, well, was there something like that for me? And yeah, for me, I changed schools around ninth grade and decided I was going to play football. And I went to like this really sort of low key, not competitive school before that. But somehow going to go play this super aggressive sport was going to be this turning point for me. And it was quite a turning point in some ways. But, I hadn't really thought about how that decision that I was going to go and do something with my body that was going to channel all those feelings that I had been sitting on for years and years, and that, in adolescence are really bubbling up.
Yeah.
Had really been a turning point in so many ways.
Yeah.
So it sounds like this is still core to your work.
It is core to my work, and I've done a lot of training since that. I got my master's degree, and there is a body work that specifically trains this. Not a lot of practitioners tend to do it. Although more practitioners connect it with doing like trauma work. And there's more understanding of that. And I do that. So I'm getting credentialed in somatic experiencing, which is specifically about working with trauma through the body, because the body is where we actually hold trauma.
Yeah, well, it's where we hold all our feelings. I mean, I think a lot of times when we talk about feelings, we talk about them like it's something that's happening in our brain, or maybe we connect it with our heart. But my understanding is that we can store feelings anywhere, and whether it's a feeling or whether it's an intense, traumatic experience. So yeah, I totally get that.
Yeah.
And how does this show up in your work? And particularly because this is rich in relationship, how does this impact relationships?
Well, I think the two major ways are, one is that as sensing machines, right, our as a human being, we're a sensing organism. So we're constantly sensing our surroundings, and this is like primarily an unconscious process, right? But it's that part of our brain, that limbic system brain, that's actually operating at all times underneath the radar, right? We focus on these thoughts in our head, right? Oh, that's what's going on. There's this thing that's happening at every second, right? That's keeping us alive, right? Yeah. And so that sensing brain is all through our body. So every part of us, actually, there's neurons that extend and go back up to the brain. But as a sensing organism, as a sensing being, right, what it's primed to do is to sense relationships, to sense people. Like, is this is this a foe or a friend or foe, right? Is this safe to enter into? And so in relationships, the more we're with somebody, the more those unconscious cues get primed. So we're not thinking so much about like every single thing they say or do, because it's already registered.
Right, it's happening on an unconscious level.
Yeah, and so a lot of it can be tone of voice, right? Somebody's tone of voice that can be very triggering, and it may not be necessarily the fault of the partner, but it could be something that gets triggered in you that's historical.
Mm-hmm.
So like you hear something, or you hear a word, or you hear a phrase, or you see like an expression on somebody's face, or you just sense the tension or something from your partner and you react.
And I would imagine those reactions, we might, if we were conscious or cognizant of it, or if we attempted to be conscious of it, we might even locate it somewhere in our body. Like I know for me, for example, if I get fearful or angry, I'll feel it right down here in my lower belly. That's the first place. Or if I get really angry, I might get it up. I might, you know,
Yeah.
right? It might go there, but often I'm not paying attention to that. I just know that, you know, from making a conscious effort to notice that.
Yeah.
All right, so we've got these places where we have emotional reactions in our bodies.
Yeah.
And what do we do about it? I mean, we've got this mad survival part of our mind that's always looking. And for the crazy thing, what's running that survival mind are all these stored feelings from, you were talking about your childhood. I can tell stories from my childhood, and you probably react to different things than I do because we both grew up differently. What's the connection between those stored feelings and those reactions? And, you know, what can we start to do about it?
So it's not just negative, right?
No, I hope not.
No, it's not just problematic. We also sense positive feelings. We sense, you know, is this a safe, loving, right, being? Is this relationship feel? You know, are we in sync, right? And so we can, when we, as you say, locate, right? When I'm working with an individual in a couple, I help them locate where that feeling is, and it usually is historical, right? And they can identify it as what it is, rather than I feel like, which is not a feeling, right? I feel like I'm really angry, when it actually could be fear.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
So,
anger could be really just be a covered feeling. Absolutely.
right. And so anger is usually, or sometimes, a secondary emotion, right? A lot of times. And so it's really helpful to locate what's the feeling underneath that.
Mm-hmm.
Because so when you as an individual understand it, you can also communicate that to your partner. So oftentimes the misunderstandings, you know, especially when there's a lot of conflict. I know, Rich, you work with a lot of conflict.
Yeah, I've been known to work with a lot of conflict. Absolutely.
Yeah, and in relationships that are conflicted, right?
Yeah.
And
actually, before you go there, the biggest challenge for me often is being in the presence of other people's conflict and noticing that I'm being triggered and not having that reaction impact how I'm working with people.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that's part of what we're talking about here is we can be triggered, we can experience fear, or even anger. But it doesn't mean that what comes out of our mouth or what we project out has to be that.
Right. Yeah. And so it's one of the first step to regulate an emotion is to identify it. Right. And so, identifying it in words is one way, but locating it physiologically is really powerful, because as I said, oftentimes what we believe the feeling is sometimes it's a thought. Like, I feel like you do this all the time. That's not a feeling, right? What, right? The feeling is.
I actually think there's a whole generation that's grown up with, I feel like what's happening is, no. Feelings are mad, glad, sad, or afraid, or there's subcategories of that. I've spent years saying that to my children, and they're just like, oh, you don't know. You don't understand. This is just how we talk.
Yeah, but it's misleading because what we hear ourselves talking, we hear ourselves, whatever we language, we hear ourselves. And so we believe that we're talking about feelings too, and we're not, right? And so there's a whole like numbing out of, I don't, if you, a lot of times, I'm sure you probably experience when you ask somebody or a couple, how you feeling? And they say, I don't know.
I'm fine.
I'm fine. Or
That's not what they're presenting, but they're fine.
yeah,
So,
or good.
so you got, you're working with somebody and they've got some history going on. How do you work with them to release that feeling, not just like think they want to release it, but really feel and let it go so that it becomes less impactful or not impactful, though I wonder how possible that is.
It is possible. And what's possible is self-regulation, right? Is really the process of feeling safe on the inside, right? So when we're able to self-regulate, when we're activated, let me start it that way. When we're activated, right? We don't feel safe on the inside, whatever it is. It's like we're afraid, or we're angry, or we feel something threatened or disappointed. And so our nervous system is like on firing. There's a threat here, there's a threat here, something's wrong. So what we want to do is to activate the parasympathetic nervous system. And so what happens is an internal sense of safety. So when, like, for example, Rich, if you were just having like a really nice conversation like you and I are having, there's no threat, it's comfortable, I feel grounded, I'm, and able to talk to you openly, and I feel safe. Couples who are in conflict do not feel safe
No.
with each other. And so the way it's a parallel process, right? Because
It's interesting because when they're working with someone, they need to feel safe enough to share their conflict, but it's kind of a funny thing. They need to feel safe enough to have the conflict in front of another person, but they still don't feel safe in each other's presence, which is a whole nother thing.
Yeah. And I'm sure, I think actually when people are sharing the conflict with someone else, it's what feels safer is that they're not triggered because they're not, it's not so intense, right? We get really activated by people we really, really care about, or when the risk is really, really high, right? If I'm married to you, or if I'm in a relationship, okay, the risk is pretty high here. There's a lot at stake, right? We can sort of neutralize more with in the presence of a therapist who is they're non-judgmental, they're open. We can sense that, okay, it's safe. And that's exactly a great example of like when we're not safe, then we're either going to shut down, right? I'm not talking about it, right? Or like I'm going to throw it at you. I'm going to throw it all on you, right? But when we can actually really feel safe inside, which is a practice like of grounding and centering, and then we're actually able to talk even in conflict about what's upsetting you, or the make a repair in the relationship, right? Or express what bothered you or what hurt you, but we're without blaming or getting defensive or criticizing.
Super cool. Cool.
Yeah.
So what are as we wrap this up, what are some quick tips that you would give people to help manage or become, maybe it's even just become more aware of the feeling body connection?
Yeah. So some simple cues, right? You mentioned when activation is a cue, right? So we feel ourselves getting whatever, we get anxious or we're getting angry, which is, and so one thing we can do, we can start to pay attention to what's happening in your physiology, right? Your heartbeat starts to go faster, right? You stop breathing. A lot of times you're not breathing as much. That's a cue.
So the first thing is notice the physical cues.
Yeah, just notice what's happening with you, right? So self-awareness is huge.
Yeah, and I think that's really important because so often what happens is a feeling comes up very quickly and very intensely, and we just let it take us. By the time we're in the process of being taken by the feeling, it's too late to notice cues at that point, because now we're on a roller coaster ride that we don't control.
Right, because
So start to notice the cues so that you can, so you go, I'm about to get on the roller coaster.
Yes, yes, and that's what happens. Like the override, right? Is your limbic system is already taken over, and is for those sciencey people, what's happened is this part of your brain is totally shut off. It's offline. And that's when people say things they don't really mean, right? They yell at each other, they call people names, they get really angry. And then later it's like, oh, wow, I really said that, and they say some really damaging.
Or even worse, later they try and justify it because they don't want to admit that they were totally out of control. And then it just builds and builds. Yeah. So I know from personal experience, some tips that could really help people with that are like mindfulness, meditation, and prayer, that the studies show that takes us out of our amygdala and into another part of our brain that's less driven by emotion. Are there any other? So first is notice the cues. Yeah. The second is maybe get some practices in your life, which is never easy. Am I missing anything out there in the world?
No, I mean,
call Carmela.
Right, but in the moment, what you can actually do is like, take a deep breath in and like exhale. Take a really, and all the way down through your belly. And if you're gonna like in the moment, if you notice yourself getting so activated, like what you described is like flooding, right? When we get so flooded with emotions, there's been research done that shows that when people's heart rate starts to get over 100 beats a minute, it's time to take a break. Like there's research.
We've all got these fancy watches now, so we can
but if you're like, if you're getting that activated, so you can feel that, right?
I recently read that if you take a deep breath and blink 3 times very intentionally, 1, 2, 3, that actually gives your amygdala a message that it's safe, and it starts to go from DEFCON 5 down, which I didn't believe until I tried it. And I was like, wow, that really works. And I guess the metaphor, or maybe it's not a metaphor, maybe it's if you were in the jungle and there were a tiger in front of you, there's no way you would blink intentionally 3 times. So you're basically telling your mind it's okay. So Carmela, by the way,
I'll give you one more though.
Yeah, go ahead.
So in the moment, 2 things you can do is like put your attention into your feet. Mm-hmm. Like you don't have to look there, but get into the practice of like, okay,
just start rolling my feet.
Yeah, I'm feel down into your feet, and then actually your breathing will slow down and soften your jaw. Like, so if you could do those 2 things in the moment, which are pretty usually you can do, right? If you practice attention down in your feet, really feel the ground underneath your feet. You start to feel centered and grounded, and then relax your jaw. And one way to think about that is like loosen your tongue in your mouth. Just relax your tongue in your mouth. It's really hard to be angry. It is really hard to be angry when you do that. Yeah. So their self-regulation is going to regulate the system.
We're almost out of time. I want to make sure that people can find you. What is the best way for people to locate Carmela Bennett?
I have a website at www.carmelabennett.com. Easy.
And that'll be in the notes for the podcast.
Yeah. And I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on Facebook, but I'm not on that much. So the best way are those 2 ways. I'm doing teletherapy now. So anybody who's interested, I also have in my signature line, if you shoot me an email, there's a line for my calendar, and you can sign up for an initial consult right there.
Awesome. And one last question. What is the legacy you'd like to leave behind?
Yeah, that's I heard, I guess it's something like, she made mistakes, but she really cared.
You do really care. It's one of the things I love about you.
Yeah, she was human, and she made mistakes, but she really cared.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you so much. And maybe we can have you back on again, and have a wonderful afternoon.
Thanks, Rich. You too.